Welcome to Total Body Modification. How many of you here have had TBM done on you? So a little bit, but not a whole. When I was 8, my world started to crumble. By the time I was 12, I was disabled. Unable to function in school. I was in a resource class in school. I was battling weight issues, hemorrhoids, varicose veins, severe depression, insomnia, rage, nightmares, allergies. I kept adding new allergies. It seemed every month or so there was something else I discovered I was allergic to. I was tired, kept injuring myself. I wasn't picked to be like on any teams, if there were like sports teams or whatever. I didn't get picked because I was slow and I wasn't well coordinated, and I, trying to catch a ball, I wasn't so good at. And so this was my world at age 12. And the science teacher assigned the whole class to go choose any book out of the science section at our junior high school and read it and write a little bit of a report on it. Now, I was pretty much illiterate. It was several years before I actually really learned to read. And so how I read this book actually is kind of a little bit of a surprise to me that I was able to do it. And the book that I chose and I read because my most favorite thing on the planet was sugar. So much so that I would come home from school, I would turn on Gilligan's Island and Brady Bunch reruns. How many of you out there have seen those shows? So my wife had not seen Gilligan's Island until just a few months ago. And of course she fell in love with it, right? So I would watch those programs and just sit and eat straight from the sugar bowl. Back in the 70s, sugar wasn't bad for you. The worst thing that sugar did, it didn't even make you gain weight. The worst thing that it did was ruin your appetite. So my mom would say, don't eat that now because then you're not going to be hungry for dinner. So that was how far the understanding in the 70s it was as far as the harmful effects of sugar. Now, the book that I found on the bookshelf had a picture of a sugar dispenser right on the cover. So that got my attention. Like, wow, I could actually read a book about my favorite thing in the world. And the title was Sweet and Dangerous, and it was by John Yudkin. How many here have heard of John Yudkin? John Yudkin discovered metabolic syndrome. How many of you have heard of metabolic syndrome? So he did the work back in the 50s, mostly in the 60s. He's one that discovered the link between sugar intake and heart disease, which today we associate and understand as metabolic syndrome. His work has come to the attention of a lot of people once again, because there's an endocrinologist who did a video called Sugar the Bitter Truth. And his name is Robert Lustig. How many of you have seen that video? If you haven't, it's well worth watching. It's based on the science behind what fructose does in the body, being a derivative of sucrose or high fructose syrups, like agave nectar, honey, high fructose corn syrup, and things like that. At any rate, I read this book, and I was convinced by the time I finished it, wow, sugar is bad for me. And I quit sugar. And I noticed immediately my moods changed, my energy went up. I noticed my just kind of physical coordination. I started changing, and it was dramatic, and it was within just a week or two. And so by the time I wrote the report, I was convinced, and I turned it to my science teacher, and he gave me a low score, and I said, why? And he said, because the idea that sugar is bad for people is preposterous. There's nothing wrong with sugar. We have enzymes in the body to digest sugar, so therefore there can't be anything wrong with it. And that affected me. I knew in that moment that reducing sugar, I completely eliminated it. Reducing sugar had a dramatic impact on my health. And I had respect for the author of the book that I had written. And I had previously had respect for my science teacher. But it was in that moment I realized, wow, this has made a big difference in my health. My science teacher is telling me I'm full of baloney. No doctor has ever told me to stop eating sugar. My parents didn't tell me to stop eating sugar. My church didn't tell me to stop eating sugar. I had to discover this on my own. And so at age 12, I took responsibility for my health. And I've been in that driver's seat now for 38 years. I worked on my health. First it was nutrition, and then it became manual medicine, chiropractic. I went to chiropractic school. But I had so damaged my sugar handling system that I also didn't drink water. And in 2001, when I went to my first TBM seminar, I worked in Victor Frank's office as a chiropractic student. I did the Applied Kinesiology 100-hour course during my first semester of chiropractic school. And I ended up working in Victor Frank's office and got exposed to him then, had TBM done on me. But then I went into a different vein of chiropractic and didn't use applied kinesiology in practice until I had a daughter develop leukemia at age 3, and that would have been 1995. And then I felt like a failure as a doctor. I thought, here's my own daughter, 3 years old, has a life-threatening illness. I have to go to the bad guys to keep her alive. And I did. Her blood count was practically 0. Single-digit hematocrit. White blood count was almost like non-registering. And platelets, I don't remember the number for the platelets, but she was basically pumping serum when we took her into the hospital. She had a staph infection. So the microorganism that resides on the skin moved into the body and took over. And it was killing her. So the first thing that was done in the hospital was antibiotics. It was the first drug she'd ever had. First drug any of my children had had. And so that was pretty challenging for me to be with my daughter in the hospital. They're doing IV antibiotics and then come back and say, she's got leukemia. Talk about a reality check as a physician who is supposedly Dr. Health. I had one of the busiest practices in the country, and I gave lectures constantly in my community and was known as the picture of health, known to have the family that was the picture of health, and all of a sudden this drops on my lap. And I thought, how did this happen, under my nose? I obviously don't have the tools to read the human body for something this dramatic to take place in my own home. And I checked my children every week as a chiropractor. That was something that I did. So my hands were on her. The form of analysis that I used in my practice, I was using with my children. And I just sat back and I looked at the impact I was having with patients, and I wasn't impressed. I had a very busy practice. I was having a lot of fun. I was making a lot of money. What else do we need? Well, I wasn't delivering the promise. And I was willing to not deliver the promise with my patients, because every now and again, really neat things would happen that caused me to feel like, yeah, I'm a good doctor, look at what happened. But most of my cases weren't that impressive. And when it comes home, and I fell with one of my own children, a 3-year-old daughter, that's when it really landed, and I felt like a fraud. I think I was a fraud. I don't think I was being fully honest with Megan. I'm not sure if this is David in the back or not, if you want. I wasn't being honest with myself about being a physician and why I got into the healing arts in the first place. Of course, I did want to make a living for my family. Of course, I did want to enjoy my career and so forth. But I got into healing because I had been sick. And I discovered alternative medicine. And that's what gave me my life back. And I wasn't really doing that. I was taking some steps, I was making some sort of a contribution, but I wasn't really bringing my patients home. I wasn't delivering the goods that I wanted to deliver. So I started to look. I went back into applied kinesiology, started taking some of John Brimhall's courses. In fact, I took all of his courses. He's based here in the Phoenix area. And my brother had recently discovered total body modification. He's a chiropractor as well. And he said, Kevin, you ought to take a look at these seminars. I said, well, yeah, I used to work in his office. And quite frankly, which is a little bit of a pun, I found TBM to be, it just seemed so complicated. It just seemed hard to learn. I remember when I was in his office, there's all these files and the body point chart, there's just hundreds of points, and I have to learn all this. And so I always kind of seen it as maybe something for smarter people, but maybe not myself. And with my brother's encouragement, I chose to go to a TBM course. And I went out to New York City and took Module 1 with Dr. Victor Frank and Dr. Bill Tremoni. And I realized, maybe not quite instantly, but very quickly, that I was home. That I had a way now to fully read the body, to know the status of the body, to get any question answered that I wanted to get answered. Is this food right for this patient? If so, in what amount? Is this supplement needed by this body? If so, what is their need? Can they digest and absorb and metabolize all of this nutrient that they need? Or do we need to start with a smaller amount and build it up? How much exercise does this patient need? What's the condition of their heart? The different parts of the heart. How's liver functioning? I learned a way to literally read exactly what was happening with my patients. Not just my patients, but just as importantly with my family. As for myself, I was still at the point when I took TBM, even though it's been since 1976 that I had severely reduced my sugar intake and had maintained that until 2001 when I took my first TBM course. If I ate a banana, I would get this shake so severely that I couldn't function. I would break break out in sweats, I would lose energy, I would lose concentration, just from eating a banana or a grape or an apple. And so TBM has helped me clean up my health. If you recognize my early symptoms, it sounded a lot like a fibromyalgia sufferer, if you understand fibromyalgia syndrome. And I am a fibromyalgia syndrome patient. I don't suffer from fibromyalgia because I've responded to the needs of my body. And I chose to specialize in fibromyalgia and have a specialty clinic in Salt Lake City for a period of 12 years where I only saw fibromyalgia syndrome patients. So I know how to clean up the human body. I would see my patients as a ship that has been out and been in several battles, been through several storms, and now it's pulling into the harbor, and my job is to assess all the damage that's happened to the ship, to assess the crew, to assess the communications equipment, the weaponry, the elimination system, the aesthetic, everything. And then put together a plan on how to get it battle ready once again. That's how I see patients. I have not found a better tool on this planet than total body modification to do that. That's why I've chosen to lead TBM. And that's why I'm here today, because I want to share this with you, because you're embarking, you're in school, a lot of you, some of you are in practice. You want to deliver the goods, and you can. And maybe you already know what you need to know to deliver the goods in the way you want. Maybe, like myself, total body modification will bring you the added information and tools and perspective that will make the difference for you. So where did TBM come from? To understand total body modification, we have to go all the way back to 1766. 1766, there was a graduating medical student in Vienna, Austria, by the name of Franz Anton Mesmer. Dr. Mesmer wrote his thesis on the concept that subtle influences have profound effects on human physiology. Subtle influences have profound effects on human physiology. And that concept and the work that he rolled out as he began to interact with patients laid the foundation of alternative healing. All alternative healing has its objective is to use subtle influences, generally things that impact the neurologic system, to restore balance within the body. He taught that disease, poor functioning in the body, was the expression of imbalanced energy. And that the neurologic system is what balances the energy of the body. So he developed a system with his hands where he would touch and stroke the patient, and some manipulation. We don't know how much manipulation he may have done early on. One of his students over time developed that. You see in your manual there a picture of Paul Castor. We know at that time, in the late 19th century, that students of Mesmer were doing a lot of manipulation. And that, you'll see a picture of D.D. Palmer and A.T. Still. They were students of Paul Castor and learned manipulation from him. And then the founder of American naturopathy, Benedict Luce, was a student of D.D. Palmer and A.T. Still. So this movement began to recognize the importance of energetic balance. Inspired Samuel Hahnemann. But there was another piece that was introduced by Vincenz Priesnitz. He came a little bit after Mesmer. He himself used magnetic healing. And in my reading, all of the early nature cure doctors used magnetic healing. Magnetic healing was touch and using human energy to heal. And Vincenz Priesnitz laid the foundation of nature cure. Diet, exercise, hydrotherapy. One of his main tenets was having patients drink water. I wondered why in TBM do we drink so much water? Why did Viktor Frankl, where do you get these ideas from? Well, the amounts of water that we drink in TBM are basically identical to what Vincenz Priesnitz found in the early 19th century to work with his patients. And so there became, over time, this synthesis of magnetic healing, energy-based healing, neurologically based healing, and nature cure. Diet, exercise, lifestyle, natural remedies. Samuel Hahnemann practiced magnetic healing. He was a student of Mesmer. If you read the later editions of his Organon, he devotes the last several sections to the topic of Mesmer type healing and pays homage to Mesmer. So we fast forward to the late 19th century, and another person comes on the horizon that's quite significant in the development of total body modification. His name is Albert Abrams. As far as I can tell, Albert Abrams is the first person to use muscle response testing, to actually use a muscle test as a tool for clairvoyance, as a way to see into the patient's body and evaluate any dysfunctions that they may have. And he used the abdominal muscle for his testing. And he would scan the patient's body. And he would then, he developed a device, he called it a silvoclast, to alter the energy from the patient's body to balance function, and then he would know that he had the right frequency when the abdominal muscle changed. He also developed a tool that looks identical to the tool we use today in TBM to do our corrections along the spine. And he was using that to stimulate autonomic reflexes. And he found that he could balance the energy and get clinical results with his patients, stimulating the spine to get an autonomic response. If I was to have to say who was the first TBM provider, I would say it would be Albert Abrams. So he's a medical doctor, practiced in San Francisco. There's a lot written about him, both for and against. He's a controversial figure at the time. And you can go read more about him. But he really laid the roots, because there was another medical student at UCLA in the early 1950s, maybe the late 1940s, early 1950s, by the name of Viktor Frankl. And Viktor Frankl had developed some sort of an illness. I did never have him explain that illness to me. But he was forced out of medical school. He was told he had to leave. They couldn't help him. He wasn't well enough to be a student, and so he left. And was told that he was terminal. So he began looking for answers, and he found a chiropractor who had studied Albert Abrams' work. actually studied directly with a disciple of Albert Abrams named Ruth Jerome. And she was the president of one of the colleges in Los Angeles where they taught naturopathy, chiropractic, and radionics. Radionics is the term that is commonly associated with Albert Abrams and spondylar therapy. And Victor Frank got well. He fully recovered under the care of this chiropractor that, again, was combining naturopathy, chiropractic, and radionics. And so he wanted to go to the school where this doctor did so he could learn the things to help patients. And he thought, well, why do I want to go back to medical school to learn how to not get people well? If I go back to UCLA, they couldn't help me. So I want to go where I was taught, or where I got the results, where this other doctor was taught. So that's what he did. After he graduated, he practiced in the office of John Thie Sr., who was a medical doctor and a chiropractor. You may have heard of his son, John Thie Jr., who is one of the AK Dirty Dozen and founded Touch for Health, if you've heard of Touch for Health. Victor Frank actually co-wrote Touch for Health, the original manual. He worked in the office, worked alongside John Thie Jr., studied with Dr. Thie. He was able to participate in all of the lunches and the dinners, because Dr. Thie was a national leader in alternative healing. And Los Angeles obviously was a mecca for alternative healing back in the mid-20th century. And so a lot of people would come visit, and Victor was told, if you come and keep your mouth shut, you can listen. And so that's what he did. And he had a chance to learn and listen to these early alternative medicine masters. And if you know your history, you know that chiropractic and naturopathy were married all throughout the first half of the 20th century. Very few chiropractic schools didn't also teach naturopathy. Benjamin Lust had a chiropractic degree, as well as his medical degree. So there was this marriage, and that the split in the two professions really happened in the second half of the 20th century. So Victor Frank was taught in the early 20th century tradition of alternative healing. And of course, he was one of the applied kinesiology Dirty Dozen, one of the original diplomates of applied kinesiology with George Goodhart. And integrated that, and he had all this information, and he just felt it was just too much. It took too much time, it was too complicated, it was hard to do, physically demanding, and he wanted to see a lot of patients, he wanted to be fun, he wanted to be quick, and there's a lot of innovation happening in the late 60s and early 70s, and he started to develop his own unique style of practice. More and more doctors came and visited his clinic to see what he was doing. As far as he was just doing alternative medicine, and nothing special is what everybody else was doing. And he said, no, was told, no, Victor, what you're doing is actually quite unique, and we want to learn from you. Well, about this time, one of his patients, his father, came in and said, how did you help my son? What did you do? We'd taken him to all the best specialists all throughout California, and no one could get him well, and you did, and no one else did. And Victor said, well, I explained what he did, and he said, I'm the director of the astronaut well-being program at Jet Propulsion Laboratories. And we invest all of this time and money, we invest years and millions of dollars developing astronauts. And so many of them at some point develop some sort of a medical issue, and we have to kick them out of the program. and we've lost all of our years of investment. Would you come and help us solve that problem and put together a program so we don't have to kick so many out of it? And Victor said, sure, and his partner at the time was Harold Havlick. So Doctors Frank and Havlick went and they started to put together this program. There were 2 medical doctors that participated as well. And what it did is it gave them access to the state-of-the-art diagnostic equipment to get real-time data, real-time lab tests, you know, of course, EKGs and EEGs and you know, spirometry and all these different functional tests. And it gave him a chance to actually take what he had been developing with his patients and get this real lab experience, this real data. And he found out, wow, this test works for a lot of patients, but not everybody. But if we change it this way, it works for everybody. Wow, these corrections work for a lot of people, but not everybody. If we change it this way, it works for everybody. And what happened is total body modification, it grew up in that time. It sunk roots, it became reproducible. And the way we teach TBM today is so that 100% of our providers will get 100% results with 100% patients when it's done properly. And it really comes from that early period, that standard, and that's how Victor always felt. If I'm going to teach you to do something and you do it properly, it's going to work. Or I don't want to teach that to you. It's experimental, and we'll save that for lunchtime conversations. We're not going to teach that in our seminars. So he finally, in 1978, began teaching total body modification. So we've been at this now for nearly 40 years. And I hope you're going to get a lot of value from this weekend. I hope you'll get a tenth as much value as I did, and the 10th as excited that I did, because it has been what I've been looking for my whole life since I was 12. It's fully given me my life back. I pushed my body in ways physically that most people couldn't imagine, as far as my world travels, as far as ascending peaks, my daily physical activity. First and foremost, I see total body modification for us. This is a gift to you and me. This is a way to find our own, to complete our own path on our own journey towards health. I don't see this as something that we learn. That's interesting. I can use that on my patients. I encourage you to really take seriously performing the tests and corrections on one another this weekend. So when you leave, you've had what we call the basic physiologic exam. And that you begin to make plans to initiate the autonomic recovery program. All healing in the body is directed by your autonomic nervous system. If your autonomic nervous system is trashed, and most of you I know are students here at the college, it's trashed. When I see graduates of medical schools, no matter what kind it is, they're that ship pulling into the harbor that is battle-worn to the point of criticality. So take this information to heart, experiment with it. We don't have dogma in TBM. It might sound like dogma, because I'm quite confident in it, but test everything that we teach you, and keep everything you've ever learned, and integrate it together. anything you've learned with value, you want to have available to help your patient because you never know what's going to be needed. And the nice thing though with TBM is you'll be able to figure out quite quickly what's needed, even if it's some obscure thing you learned 10 years ago. In Module 2, we teach you what we call menuing, which is a way to get the patient's body to tell you exactly what it is it needs to recover. And that technique, interestingly enough, goes back to 1783 with Armand de Chastenet Marquis de Puységur in France, a student of Mesmer, who discovered that the human body actually knows what's wrong with it, and discovered a technique to get the body to disclose that information. The problem is that technique took several sessions that were several hours long to get to the point where the body would reveal itself. That's where the brilliance and the miracle of muscle response testing, first with Abrams, and then the quantum leap it took in the 1960s with George Goodhart, and then the quantum leap that it went again with Victor Frank with menuing. Now within seconds, we can find out what is happening in the body and what the body needs to heal. But again, let this be a gift to you. And if you do that, it's so easy to enroll patients in their own healing. When you're enrolled in your own healing and you have tools that are making the difference, it's really easy to draw patients into that. They feel your excitement, they feel your certainty, and they see the light that shines from a well body, and that will attract them. In my experience, those that fully embrace TBM all develop waiting list practices because it works so well, it works so quickly, it's fun. It's not that expensive for patients to receive, especially compared to a lot of other things that are out there. So not only is it a gift to us, it's a gift to our patients, but it makes for a really fun life and a really fun practice. So